Welcome into the 10 best opening traps in the Scandinavian defense that arises from black responding with pawn to d5 against the king's pawn move of white. Now, in most cases, white is going to capture right here on d5, and this popular is actually very popular on amateur level, despite having a little bit of a negative reputation, because beginners are told that it is bad for black because here they have to expose their queen, but now white will gain this extra tempo. Now, here is a very simple trick. Let's take this move back. I've actually been playing the Scandinavian Defense for years in Blitz and in standard tournaments against grandmasters on a grandmaster level, and here's how you do it right. You can go knight f6 first and then recapture this pawn with a knight. In this case, you don't have to expose your queen at all, and it makes it a great opening. At this point, some of your opponents will try to hold on to this pawn and play c4. Some will just develop with knight to c3, and pros and advanced players play pawn to d4, which is considered the best move. We'll talk about all three options. We have some tricks reserved in all of them. Let's say they go pawn d4, which is considered the strongest move. Here there's a very interesting provocative variation. You capture this pawn, and after they play c4, which looks very nice, they build up the center and chase your knight away, you go knight to b4. And this is a provocative move because at first it looks like white's got this double attack, queen a4 check, and it looks like they're about to win your knight. Nevertheless, you play knight c6, guarding this knight, but they still see an opportunity to win the other one thanks to this pin by playing pawn to d5, and it looks like that is basically it. They got you. But instead, you play pawn to b5, and this is a really marvelous trap. I really wish that you play it and you've got a great likelihood of getting this position in your games. Now, white can capture either with pawn or with a queen. In both cases, we have some unpleasant tricks for them. Let's say they wish to maintain this pin and they capture with a queen. In this case, they no longer guard the square c2, and therefore you can jump there, forking their king and rook. Now the king needs to move, and after it moves, trying to attack your knight, you play another unexpected move. You don't need to take this rook straight away, because then they can take right here, give you a check, and white has some compensation. You instead play bishop to d7. And that is a very interesting move. Now, what can they do? Looks like they can capture either of your knights. But if they capture this one, that is clearly pretty bad because of this fork, and we're actually having this discovered attack. So that does not work for white. How about pawn takes c6? In this case, you change your mind and you play bishop to g4. And that is the move they did not expect. This is a double check from the bishop as well as from your queen, and with a double check they have to move the king. Therefore, they capture the knight. Temporarily, looks like they're good, but then you play queen to d1, and that ruins the fun for white. Now the king has to move. The only square is king to c3. Now you grab this bishop and deliver one more check, and basically white is done. If the king tries to move somewhere here, you can also include your rook into the attack and you're going to checkmate them soon. Usually they're going to bring the king right here, but then you don't even need to grab their material. You can just checkmate the king, not like that. You go bishop to d1, check. They have to play king to a3 or something like this, and then you play a really nice opening move, pawn to e5. The move is good when you're playing it on the first move, but of course it's even better when it's the last move of the game. And now e5 delivers this killing check, and because the other bishop controls this diagonal, this is actually almost a checkmate. It's going to become an actual checkmate within a few moves, because they need to cover the king somehow. If let's say pawn c5, then you just capture it, renewing the check. They can't push the b pawn forward because it's pinned. Therefore they have to give up the queen. But now queen check, once again b4, and you slide back to c1, delivering this very unusual checkmate from the home rank of white. Like, really fascinating trap, and your opponents will definitely be raging after this. Right after you played pawn to b5, now we know that queen takes b5 is not good for white. How about pawn takes b5? Then you still play knight d4, exploiting a little bit of a similar trick. Now they can't really take this knight because of this royal fork, and we're gonna win the queen. But if they don't capture the knight, let's put it back, you are threatening to go there forking the king and rook anyways, therefore they gotta do something about that. If they play knight a3, let's say they spot these tactics, then you just play pawn e5, simply guarding this knight on b4 by your bishop, and overall having this pretty nice position because your two knights are extremely active, controlling a whole lot of squares, making it hard for white to make moves and to finish their development somehow. Usually, they'll try to play bishop d2, getting rid of this annoying knight on b4, and you kind of pretend like you blundered it, and you simply capture this pawn on d5. They happily win your knight on b4, but we've got you covered. Here, after this, you first play queen e4 check. That is the trick. We want the queen to be right here on the 4th rank. We'll see why in a second. And after they cover anyhow, only then you recapture on b4, check their king, they capture, they're happy, they're thinking they're up a piece, but now it turns out that your queen on e4 is x-raying their queen. And you've got this discovered attack with knight to f3 check. They have to take the knight, but now you grab their queen. And not only you grab the queen, you actually keep attacking right here and right here. And after something like knight c3 and queen takes b2, you actually attack pretty much everything. You're going to grab some more material, and you definitely are winning the game. Did you know that the Scandinavian Defense was used in the first recorded chess game played in 1475, and we're still using it? Crazy. Anyway, after pawn takes d5, now besides the knight f6 and knight takes d5, of course, most people would capture with a queen. And now knight c3 is considered the main move, but some may try to play d4, and after knight f6, they then go c4. They wish to gain a tempo that way by the pawn, and simultaneously to build up this strong pawn center. And here there's another very interesting variation which usually catches your opponents off guard. They expect your queen to go somewhere back or maybe to a5, but instead you play queen e4, seemingly violating common chess rules once again, keeping your queen in the middle of the board, and it looks like white is going to gain tempos attacking it. But strangely enough, this move queen to e4 is actually the best move confirmed by Stockfish, and somehow tactically it works for black. So right now they're going to need to cover their king somehow. They can't play this natural move bishop e2, as that will leave this pawn on g2 undefended. Therefore, it's more natural for white to play bishop to e3. But now you strike in the center with pawn e5. And not only you contest the center, but also you give way to your bishop from f8 to be developed and to deliver another check. And you make use of this opportunity when you go knight c3, trying to gain a tempo and chase this queen away, but you then play bishop b4, and it's still hard for white to get rid of your queen. And the situation feels annoying. They feel like this exposed queen should be exposed somehow, but they can't see the way to do that. They still can't play bishop d3 or something like that, as that would hand this pawn on g2 and expose their rook. Therefore, that does not work. f3 would also be a big blunder, because you can just grab this other bishop on e3. That is clearly bad. But now they can come up with another idea. They see that this knight is actually attacking your queen, and the only problem is this bishop on b4. So they think, okay, how about queen a4? That is actually this double attack. You play knight to c6, and once again they notice that, hey, the knight is pinned, I can go pawn d5, and I can win it. But here you can utilize a similar tactical motif to what we discussed in the previous trap, which is something completely sudden. You just grab this pawn on d5. Now the knight can't move because it's pinned. Therefore, they have to grab it by the pawn. They think that you will just get the other pawn for your knight, but you instead play this in-between check, bishop takes c3, which once again opens up this discovered attack along the 4th rank. Like, this is actually a very rare tactical motif, but somehow in Scandinavian Defense you can actually use it sometimes, and here on the next move you just grab the queen, getting a winning position. Going back to my favorite line where you go knight to f6 and you aim to get this pawn back but not expose your queen. Therefore, here, if they wish to claim their material advantage, they should play pawn to c4. That's the only move that will actually solidify this pawn and make it impossible for you to get it back. In this case, you have to play in a gambit style and play either pawn e6 or pawn c6, where you will be down a pawn indeed. However, you'll get a leading development and nice attacking chances. Both moves are nice. e6, for example, allows you after this trade to develop your bishop, and now we can see that we've got two minor pieces in the game, this diagonal for the bishop, this line for the queen, and all in all, we are ready to begin our attack. Now, they see that this pawn on d2 is a backward pawn, right? If they can't push it forward, it's going to be just a lot of weaknesses down this file. Therefore, they normally play pawn to d4. Then you go bishop b4, check to the king. They cover it with a knight, and then you play knight to e4. Since you are ahead in development, you start putting pressure straight away. The knight is pinned, and you're adding one more attack against it. They gotta do something. Lots of your opponents will play this trivial move bishop to d2, just because in similar situations, that is often the solution. But what they overlook here is that although they guarded this knight, but they also block the queen, and therefore you are now free to capture this pawn on d4, adding even more pressure. And now your position is actually very good. Now, white needs to be truly careful trying to equalize this, and I'm not even sure if that's possible. Probably they're already in trouble, because indeed you have like too strong pressure. Yeah, I mean, I think they're in trouble actually. But to make things nicer, Lots of them will see that exposed queen, and they will once again try to make use of this by going knight to f3, forcing your queen to move again, but not always it's a bad thing. Going back a few moves, what if white plays bishop to d2 instead of knight to c3 against your check to their king? After bishop to d2, you do not want to trade. That's one of the evergreen rules of chess. To take is a mistake. Do not push an exchange for no reason. Instead, it's much better to bring more pieces into play and maintain the tension. You can guard this bishop by playing queen to e7, and also you are just preparing your development. Very often in these variations, you're going to play knight c6 and to castle queenside, and since you have so huge lead in development, their king is in danger. Now, taking on b4 is actually bad for white, because that will allow you to only reposition your queen to a more active square and to attack all around. However, they still see an opportunity to play queen a4 with this double attack. And somehow in the Scandinavian defense, often this queen a4 move is a very deceptive idea. It feels winning for white, but in reality, it loses the game. And here you can pull off this Uno reverse card by going bishop to d7, and you counter their check by your check. And you also win the game, because not only their king is in check, but that is also an attack of their queen, and on the next move you're going to simply grab it. As we discussed earlier, if they wish to solidify this pawn, you need to undermine it. And you can do this by playing pawn e6, which we have just analyzed, but you can also play pawn to c6. I like both of these options and I play them in different games. After c6, you aim to get your pawn back, therefore they capture, but now with knight takes c6, you bring your knight into play. Also, you control this d4 square, making it impossible for them to push the pawn forward and to build up their center straight away. If they play knight to f3, trying to prepare this move, you can still block it by going pawn e5 yourself, adding one more attack to this pawn. And in all these positions, you usually have great compensation for your sacrificed pawn, because their extra pawn is weak, it's blocking their pieces, and it's not doing all that much in the game. Moreover, if they play any careless moves such as knight to c3, you can actually push this pawn forward and gain temples attacking this knight. And right now their situation becomes really critical. This knight does not have many squares to go to. You're controlling all the central squares. They don't want to undevelop the knight back to g1, that is just too passive, but if they try knight to g5 to attack this pawn, then you solidify it, and still white has a hard time completing their development. They can't move this d pawn forward because you're going to capture it, and otherwise, how are they going to complete their development? Many of them play queen e2, thinking that that adds one more attack against this pawn and puts some pressure down the e-file, but in reality it's counterproductive because you can go knight d4 and refute that idea. Now you're hitting the queen, but you're also eyeing the c2 square, possibly forking their king and rook, therefore the queen is pushed back. After that you can play pawn h6, kicking this knight away. The only square for the knight is knight h3, but now after this trade on h3 you completely weaken their position, and knight f3 check forces them to play the bomb cloud opening, and then queen to d3 finishes the game pretty quickly. Last time white got in trouble because they allowed you to push your e-pawn forward and to attack their knight on f3. Some of your pawns will be more careful, they'll play knight to c3, and after you go pawn e5, they won't develop your knight, seeing that you can push it away, but they'll play d3 first, getting control over this square. In this case, you can still play bishop c5 and make use of this weak diagonal. Moreover, on the next move, you're threatening to go knight g4 and indeed create some very unpleasant threats. Therefore, some of your pawns will play bishop g5, thinking that this pin is something very unpleasant. In reality, there is no need to worry, you're ahead in development, you're the one attacking, so you don't have to worry about this pin. And you can simply castle, completing your development. Now, once again, some of your pawns will see that this pin is somewhat unpleasant, they'll try to capitalize on it by going knight to e4, which looks strong at first as it hits the bishop, it hits the knight, and we're still exposing and making use of this pin. But in reality, you've got this legal checkmate that always feels illegal because it's so good. After knight to d4, that is a forced checkmate after you sacrifice your queen. The next trap works perfectly well, especially against people below 1500. Here after you play knight f6, trying to get this pawn back, most players will play knight to c3, which is actually not a very great idea because it does not really defend this pawn. You can still capture it back and you successfully accomplished your idea. You destroyed their center and you put their knight in the middle of the board. Moreover, they usually follow up with one more inaccuracy. They capture on d5, allowing you to develop your queen, but now they don't have this knight which could possibly jump here and gain that tempo. Right now the situation is symmetric and you are up a tempo, so it's kind of like they're now playing black, they now have to equalize. Moreover, after they try to develop their queen side somehow and go d4, you can start putting some pressure a little bit against their center. After knight f3, you continue with bishop g4, putting pressure down this diagonal, therefore solidifying your attack to this pawn. After they go bishop e2, castle queenside, adding one more attacker along the d-file. They try to solidify it. Now you play e5, breaking open the center. You keep attacking this pawn all the time, not letting them to break free and to just complete their development. After they take it, they expect you to start trading queens, but instead you slide to the square e4 and all of a sudden you win the game. It's a very surprising variation because so far it looked like white played all logical and proper moves, but they're lost. Now, the trick is you open up this rook to hit the queen. So you don't trade queens, you actually keep attacking them. And after they do whatever, let's say they move the queen away, you can then take this pawn on e5, and all of a sudden they're in trouble and they're lost. You have a really strong attack against this knight on f3. You're going to capture it and win a pawn and possibly even something bigger, plus expose their king. But what can they do? They can't castle, because if they try so, they're going to lose this bishop on e2. It's not an option. But if they try to trade material with knight takes e5, you don't take here, you instead choose this target and you win the game. Let me also show you one counter trick, because there is one variation that your opponents are going to use to try to defeat you quickly. It's getting very popular recently, and therefore you need to be aware. After queen takes d5, knight to c3 and queen a5, we go into the classical line of the Scandinavian defense. There is this b4 crazy variation. Now the b4 itself is not too bad if you actually continue with rook b1, just trying to get a little bit ahead in development. But they play this in connection with this move knight to b5, and they have a trap in mind. The idea is that this pawn is now attacked, and after queen a5 they play bishop c4. And now they expect you to play either pawn a6 or pawn c6, and in both cases that actually is a blunder because of this bishop takes f7. After king takes, they follow up with queen h5 check, and as you cover the king, they then go knight d6, this really unexpected discovered attack, and they win your queen. This is what they're hoping for. Now let me show you how to turn this around. Initially, of course, we're not going to blunder these tactics by going pawn to c6. Instead, you simply play knight to f6, and that covers the square h5. Therefore, if they now try to sack and play queen h5, it's not going to work. You're going to simply grab their queen. Seeing that, some of them will play bishop b2, trying to trade the knight and then to force the same tactics yet again. In this case, you can actually kind of let them do that. You play pawn to c6, kind of like in the main line. They trade this knight, and now they think, oh, now the knight is gone, and I can pull off the same idea. They sack the bishop right here, you accept it, they then play queen h5, they're happy, they're seeing that your king is exposed, they're attacking it, you play king to g7, but now they start thinking, what am I going to do next? You know, in the main line, the king was forced to go somewhere there, and they had all these discovered attacks and checks. But now there are no checks. Moreover, not only they sacrificed one bishop for no reason, that bishop sack on f7, but they also are now going to be losing the knight along this thief rank pin. It's a very unusual pin, but really the knight cannot move or else they are going to lose the queen. And therefore you win two pieces actually in a row. Moreover, some of them will play queen g4 trying to attack your king and blundering the queen in one move, then they're completely destroyed. The next trap does not work against beginners just because they don't play those moves as white, while in fact the moves are good, and therefore this trap works against intermediate to advanced level opponents. They play pawn d4, as that's one of the best moves for white here, probably the best. Then you take it with the knight, and then, as we have seen before, playing c4 straight away sometimes exposes their position too much, stretches it out, and therefore it is considered a little bit more accurate for white to just play knight to f3 first. Then you can play bishop f5, kind of pretending like you just developed. Then they play c4, expecting your knight to go somewhere back, but you can still play knight to b4, and it turns out that your bishop f5 move was actually made on purpose. Together with this bishop, we're now threatening knight to c2, forking the king and rook. And as always, we tempt them to play this move queen a4, trying to attack your knight. By the way, in this position, even if they don't play this move, your position is still nice. I mean, why not? Like, you have an active position, they have to defend. But queen a4 tries to attack your king and knight. You then cover. They go pawn d5, trying to make use of this pin and to win your knight. They think that it's all shaky and one of the knights are going to be lost, if not both of them. But then, as we know, there is knight to c2 check, right? That really upsets white, because what can they do? The king needs to move somewhere. If the king moves here to e2, that's a bit awkward, and also after this knight a1 and pawn captures, you've got this queen d3 check that wins the game in this line. If instead they move their king to the d-file, then you happily grab the rook, and it turns out that they can't even take your knight, because now their pawn is pinned. Moreover, there is one more trick that they are likely to overlook. If they just play any developing move, such as knight to c3, there is this nasty bishop to c2 double attack. You're making one another fork on the same square c2, but this time with the bishop, not with the knight. Alright, let's take it back. Let's say they notice this threat, and they play knight d4. The move that looks pretty solid at first. They're attacking your bishop, they're also covering the square c6, c2, they're still putting pressure to your knight, but then you can get really gritty and gobble up this knight on b1. Boom. Hit it once again. Now what can they do? If they capture this knight with a pawn, that would expose their own knight, you're gonna grab it and win the game. Therefore they wish to take it right here, and now you just need to be careful. You should not take it with a pawn, because now after queen takes c6 check, like that allows white to achieve a perpetual check. But you just need to play queen to d7, and again their position is completely spoiled. Now, you're putting the pin to this queen, therefore the knight can't move away, meaning you're going to capture it on the next move. Plus, we still have this bishop c2 double attack on the next move coming, and therefore their position is just ruined. You're going to win something on the next move on top of that. Having said all that, of course you cannot really expect to become an advanced chess player just by relying on opening traps. And therefore, if you wish to improve your positional understanding, check out